Marcus Hale grabbed the microphone straight out of the host's hand, pointed across the ballroom, and laughed. "Someone tell me who the hell invited her." 200 people went silent. Every head turned. Clara Bennett sat alone at the back table, her wheelchair catching the chandelier light like a spotlight she never asked for. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She picked up her wine glass and took one slow, deliberate sip, eyes locked on his. Steady, unmovable, motion. But Marcus had no idea. None of them did. Because the quiet man who had just walked through that door behind her was about to make every single person in that room regret this night for the rest of their lives. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, subscribe. Every story I tell is for someone who needs to hear it. The invitation had been sitting on Clara Bennett's kitchen table for 6 weeks. Not hidden, not buried under mail. Right there in the open white envelope, embossed gold lettering, Hargrove Academy class reunion, 20 years propped against the pepper grinder like it had opinions about whether she was going to show up. She'd moved it twice. Once to make room for a 94-page UN legal brief she was translating from Portuguese into English and French simultaneously. Once to wipe down the table after Lily, her neighbor's kid, 7 years old, absolutely no concept of cup placement, knocked apple juice across half the kitchen. But she hadn't thrown it away, and she knew exactly why. Because some part of her wanted to go. Not the reasonable part. The reasonable part had a list. The hotel would have stairs somewhere, they always did, no matter what the accessibility page on the website said. The people would be exactly the kind of people she'd spent her adult life learning to have no patience for, the ones who smiled too wide and said nothing real. She had a deadline Monday, 16 pages of a UNESCO framework agreement that were going to take everything she had. The reasonable part knew that walking, moving back into that building, into that specific collection of people, was the kind of thing that cost more than it gave back. But the reasonable part of Clara Bennett was not the only part running the show. It never had been. Clara Bennett was 38 years old. She had lived alone in a third-floor apartment in a city that was still in 2024, figuring out what accessibility actually meant in practice versus what it meant on a permit application. She'd adapted the apartment herself, every inch of it measured, adjusted, arranged with the precision of someone who understood that independence was not a gift the world handed you. It was a thing you engineered. She'd been in the wheelchair for 14 years. The accident happened when she was 24, a Tuesday morning in October. A crosswalk she had every legal and moral right to be standing in. A man named Gerald Pruitt, who had been awake for 31 hours and had a blood alcohol level of 0.18 when he ran the red light at 42 miles an hour. She didn't remember the impact. She remembered standing on the curb, looking at her phone, thinking about a sentence in a brief. She was reviewing a translation error in a labor rights document, a Portuguese verb tense that shifted the meaning from shall to should, and why that distinction could determine whether 300 textile workers in Sao Paulo had legal recourse or just a very sympathetic-sounding document with no actual teeth. She was thinking about that. Then she was on the ceiling of a hospital room looking down at herself, which was not how it actually worked, but was how her brain filed the first hours. And her mother was crying into a paper cup of bad coffee, and a doctor with kind eyes was explaining very carefully that the damage to her lower spine was permanent. She remembered looking at the ceiling tiles, the real ceiling flat on her back, the actual one, and thinking with a clarity that surprised even herself. Okay. So, what comes next? That was Clara. What came next was 3 years of rehabilitation, 2 graduate degrees completed online because that was what was possible, and she was not a person who spent much time mourning what was possible over what wasn't. A career that had grown quietly and without anyone else's permission or assistance into one of the most respected in its field. She translated legal and humanitarian documents. Not the straightforward ones, not the press releases, and the public-facing language. The hard ones. The ones that mattered. International contracts where a single word choice could shift liability across 3 jurisdictions. Treaty frameworks where the difference between recognizes and acknowledges was the difference between an enforceable commitment and a diplomatic courtesy. UN procedural briefs for operations in places most people couldn't find on a map. She'd worked with governments that didn't advertise their problems and organizations whose entire function depended on nobody knowing they existed. She was precise. She was fast. And she understood not just language, but intention. The thing underneath the words. The pressure points where meaning could be twisted, buried, or protected. She worked from her apartment usually between 5 a.m. and 2 p.m., which gave her the quiet she needed and left the afternoons open for the calls that came from time zones 9 hours ahead of her. She had a system. She had purpose. She had a rhythm that worked. What she had slowly, quietly stopped reaching for somewhere around her 34th birthday, though she couldn't have told you the exact moment, was a room that treated her like she belonged in it. Not accommodated. Not managed. Not smiled at with the specific warmth of people who wanted credit for being kind. Belonged. She almost didn't go. She sat by her window on a Friday evening in late October, watching the light go orange over the rooftops, and she turned the invitation over in her hand, and she thought about all the very reasonable explanations she could give herself for staying home. She ran through them methodically, the way she ran through a document looking for errors, checking each one, testing its weight. And then a name came up. Marcus Hale. It had come up twice in 1 week, which was not a coincidence. Once in a briefing document a client had forwarded to her redacted in places, but not enough. Once in a news segment she caught by accident while eating dinner, the television on, mostly for background noise. Marcus Hale philanthropist. Marcus Hale financial innovator. Marcus Hale, whose foundation had distributed over $40 million to international humanitarian programs in the last fiscal year. She'd watched the segment. She'd read the briefing document 3 times, and she'd noticed something. It was small, the kind of thing that required her specific training and a decade and a half of it to catch. A legal term, used in a very particular way, in a very particular context, that didn't match the framework it was supposed to be operating under. The term was beneficial transfer allocation, 4 words that should have appeared in a standard disbursement clause in the position a standard disbursement clause occupied. Except it didn't. It appeared in a compliance certification section. And in a compliance certification section, beneficial transfer allocation wasn't describing a process. It was obscuring one. She'd noted it, filed it in the back of her mind where she kept things that hadn't yet revealed their significance. Then she'd picked up the phone and called the car service. She'd been in enough luxury hotels over the years, conferences, professional events, the occasional charity function a client had pulled her into to read them the way she read documents. The lobby told her the rate. The elevator placement told her who the space was designed for. The location of the accessibility ramp around the side through a service corridor that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner told her everything else. Mad, she navigated it without incident, which meant no one had yet offered to help her in that particular tone. She knew the tone. Everyone in a wheelchair knew the tone. The one that was actually an expression of the speaker's discomfort dressed up as concern deployed in a voice pitched 2 notes higher than necessary. She'd absorbed that tone approximately 10,000 times in 14 years. She had never once found it helpful. The registration table. A young woman in a headset and a practiced smile. Name. Clara Bennett. The pause. She'd learned to read that pause the way she read documents quickly, completely without emotion. The micro-recalibration. The internal image updating. The woman's face doing the math between the name on the list and the person now in front of her. Of course, Clara, yes. Great. She handed over a badge and a folded seating card. You're at table 14. Clara looked at this number. She knew hotel ballroom layouts. Table 14 in a room this size was going to be at the back. Is there any flexibility on seating? Oh, I'm so sorry, it's all assigned. The smile didn't move. but table 14 has a great view of the presentation screen. That was the thing you said when you wanted to make a back table sound like a privilege. Of course it does, Clara said pleasantly, and moved on. She came through the main doors into the ballroom, and the room changed. Not dramatically, nothing as honest as a gasp. It was subtler than that, the way water changes when something enters it. A shift in attention, quick and private, person to person, like a message passed in a language everyone in the room spoke fluently, and none of them would ever admit to knowing. She had learned to feel it. In the early years after the accident, she'd spent enormous energy wondering if she was imagining it. She wasn't. She navigated to the back. She passed Jennifer Voss, class president, now apparently heading a nonprofit in Connecticut, whose eyes showed in rapid succession recognition, surprise. Something that wanted to be warmth and settled for courtesy. The hug was brief and careful, the kind people gave when they weren't sure where to put their hands. She passed David Cho, who'd been in her linguistics seminar, now a venture capital partner in San Francisco. He shook her hand. He was genuine. She'd always liked David, but she could see the effort it cost him to conduct the conversation naturally, to keep his eyes at eye level, to not let the chair become the primary fact of her presence. It was kind, and the kindness itself was a kind of distance. She reached table 14. Two couples already seated deep in their own conversation. They glanced up, tight, polite smiles. Their names entered one ear and didn't go any further. She placed her bag on the table, arranged herself, and looked out at the room. 200 people, crystal chandeliers, ambient music designed to make everyone feel like they were living inside a luxury watch commercial. And Clara Bennett at table 14 watching all of it with the detached precision of someone conducting a study. She reached into her bag, found the small notebook she always carried. Force of habit, trained reflex, the tool of a person who thought in language and needed to write things down to understand them fully. She uncapped a pen, began to move a sentence around in her head. She was so focused on the sentence that she almost didn't hear the chair next to her scrape against the floor. Why? He settled in with the careful, economical movements of a man used to making himself small in rooms he hadn't planned to be in. Early 40s, she guessed. Dark jacket, no tie. A face that had some weather in it. Not hardness, not bitterness, but time. The kind of face that had been through something significant and arrived on the other side without needing to make everyone aware of it. He looked at the seating card in front of her. Looked at the card in his hand. I might be at the wrong table, he said. Is this 14? It is. He checked his card. 15. That's on me. He started to gather himself to stand. 15 is over there. Clara nodded toward a table currently in the middle of what appeared to be a very loud, very self-congratulatory story, all 6 people braying with laughter at something she couldn't hear. He looked back. You're welcome to stay here if you want, she said. It's quieter. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'll stay if you don't mind. I don't mind. He sat back down and extended his hand. Ethan Brooks. Clara Bennett. You graduated from here. Class of 2004. She looked at him. You? Same. He looked out at the room the way she'd been looking at it, not with nostalgia, not with longing, but with the measured expression of a man taking an honest inventory. I almost didn't come, he said. So did I. He turned to look at her, not a glance, not the quick scan and recalibrate she'd been absorbing all night. He actually turned and looked at her with the kind of attention that didn't announce itself or perform itself, just landed. His eyes didn't dip to the chair and come back. They didn't carry that particular layering of pity and admiration she knew so well, the look that said, I'm impressed you're here given everything. They just met hers, steady, even. What changed your mind? He asked. She thought about the briefing document, the legal term in the wrong position. Marcus Hale's name appearing twice in 1 week in places it had no business appearing. Professional curiosity, she said. About a reunion. About someone who's going to be at the reunion. He nodded, not pressing. Fair enough. He poured water from the table carafe, water, not wine, she noted. My daughter told me I needed to stop using her as a reason not to do things. Clara raised an eyebrow. She's 9, he said, and the way he said it, the warmth and the weariness braided together so thoroughly, they were one thing told her most of what she needed to know about who Ethan Brooks was. She sounds wise. Children usually are. He set the carafe down. It's just me and her. Has been for 3 years. He said it simply. No self-pity. No the particular tone some men used when they wanted credit for being present. He said it like a fact of geography. This is where I live. This is what the terrain looks like. I'm sorry, Clara said, for whatever made it just the two of you. He nodded once. Her name is Lily. A small pause. She picked it herself, from a book. She told me last year, she said, I know you and Mom named me Lily, but I would have chosen it anyway. Like she needed me to understand it was hers. Clara looked at him for a moment. She sounds like someone worth coming home to. She is, he said quietly. She really is. The program started. The welcome speech, the photo slideshow, the awards for professional achievements that mostly existed to make the successful feel confirmed, and the unsuccessful feel the specific public weight of contrast. Clara watched it all the way. She watched everything cleanly, without editorial filing what mattered. Marcus Hale had significant gravitational pull. She'd been watching him since she arrived. He hadn't changed as much as 20 years should have required. He had the look of a man who had paid carefully and consistently for the appearance of effortlessness. The kind of man who moved through rooms as if the rooms had been arranged in advance for his arrival. His suit was tailored. His watch caught the light from 30 feet away. And when he laughed, which he did often, it was the laugh of someone who had never once laughed because something surprised him, only because laughter in his hands was a tool. He caught Clara watching once. She didn't look away. He did. Beside her, Ethan had ordered coffee. They'd fallen into conversation, the kind that surprised her with how naturally it moved, how little effort either of them spent managing it. She told him about her work in broad terms, translation legal and humanitarian documents, international frameworks. He listened with the kind of attention that meant he was actually processing, not just waiting for a pause. He asked specific questions. Good ones. She found out he'd been in finance for 15 years. Left it 3 years ago. Consulting now mostly private work schedule, designed around school drop-off and pickup. He said that last part, matter-of-factly without apology, in a way that she registered as unusual in her experience of men who described their professional lives. You're good at listening, she said. That's rare. You're good at knowing when someone's not answering the question, he replied. She looked at him. Are you not answering? There are parts of the 15 years, he said carefully, that belong to tonight and parts that don't. She understood that completely. She had her own sections closed to the public. Fair, she said. It was 40 minutes into the program when Marcus Hale detached himself from the group he'd been anchoring for the past hour and moved toward the back of the room. Toward them. Clara watched him come. He arrived at the table with the easy territorial confidence of a man visiting a place he already owned. He put his hand on the back of Clara's wheelchair, not her shoulder, not the table, the chair fingers curling around the handle. Grip a gesture so casually presumptuous that it took the breath out of the room. That was her body. She absorbed it without reaction. She had practice. Ethan Brooks, Marcus said, looking at Ethan exclusively. I heard you were here. Marcus! Ethan's voice was even, quiet. The quietness of a man who'd learned that the less volume you used, the more weight each word carried. It's been a while. Marcus's eyes moved to Clara, Then briefly the way eyes moved over furniture. I didn't realize you two knew each other. We just met, Ethan said. Small world. Marcus's hand hadn't moved from the back of the chair. Clara, isn't it? I remember you from linguistics, was it? Legal linguistics, she said. Yes. Right. His tone said right, the wheelchair girl who was good at words. His tone said it so cleanly without a single impolite word that the people at the next table over would have heard nothing wrong at all. Clara took a sip of her wine, held his gaze. You've built quite an operation, Ethan said to Marcus in a conversational tone so perfectly calibrated it was almost art. The foundation work especially. The meridian disbursement structure, interesting approach to capital flow management. Something moved across Marcus Hale's face. It was quick, controlled. A man practiced at surfaces. But Clara was a professional reader of the thing underneath surfaces, and she caught it. The micro-contraction around his eyes, the almost imperceptible stillaning. The way his hand on the back of her chair stopped moving entirely for exactly 2 seconds, before he said pleasantly, You follow the foundation work. I follow a lot of things, Ethan said. Marcus smiled. It was a very good smile. We should catch up properly. I've got a few people I need to get to tonight, but... He produced a card from his breast pocket, set it on the table between them. Don't be a stranger. He moved away. Clara waited until he was 3 tables out of range. Then, without turning her head, You just poked something. I know, Ethan said. He's going to make a call in the next 4 minutes. Ethan was already watching him from the corner of his eye. I know that too. She looked at Ethan, then directly the same look she gave documents when they started revealing their real structure. Who are you? Ethan Brooks. He was quiet for a moment. Someone, he said slowly, who has been watching Marcus Hale for a long time. A pause. And who tonight may need someone with your specific skill set, more than I've needed anything in about 3 years. Clara looked at him, looked at Marcus Hale across the room already on his phone, the easy smile replaced by something private and deliberate. She thought about the briefing document, the legal term in the wrong position, the name that had appeared twice in 1 week. She thought about the invitation sitting on her kitchen table for 6 weeks. Dad. She thought about the stubborn, unreasonable part of herself that had known in the way that stubborn, unreasonable parts of a person sometimes knew things before the rest of them caught up, that there was something on the other side of this night that was hers. Tell me, she said, what you're looking at. Ethan set down his coffee cup, looked at her with those steady, even eyes that had met hers without flinching from the moment he sat down. And he began to talk. Ethan didn't look around before he spoke. He didn't lower his voice theatrically, or lean in the way people did when they wanted their secrecy to be noticed. He just set his coffee cup down, turned slightly in his chair, so that his back angled toward the nearest table, and began. 12 years ago, he said, I took a job with a private financial intelligence firm. Not the kind of firm that advertises. The kind that governments contract when they need someone to follow money through places money isn't supposed to go. He paused. Not for effect. He paused the way people paused when they were choosing how much of a true thing to say. I was good at it. I had a specific gift for reading financial architecture, the way structures are built, not to process money cleanly, but to move it in ways that look clean from the outside. And Clara was listening. Not the polite, surface-level listening she'd performed all evening at this table with people who had said nothing worth hearing. She was listening the way she listened to documents, every word weighed, every pause, noted every gap between what was said and what wasn't said, filed and held. 3 years ago, Ethan continued, I left. Lily's mother died in March. By April, I understood that I couldn't keep doing the kind of work that required me to disappear for 6 days without notice and still be the father Lily needed me to be, so I left. He said it simply. I've been consulting since, private select clients, work that lets me control my schedule. But you didn't stop watching Marcus Hale. He looked at her. No, I didn't. Why? He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. She counted. Because 14 months ago, a federal investigation opened into a series of humanitarian aid frameworks that had been modified. Funds designated for program delivery were being redirected through a series of intermediary entities before reaching their stated destinations, or not reaching them. He picked up his coffee cup, set it back down without drinking. 47 programs, food security operations, medical supply chains, emergency shelter infrastructure in 3 different post-conflict regions. Roughly $60 million designated for people who needed it moving, instead through a structure designed to make the movement look legitimate. The ballroom noise continued around them, glasses clinking. Someone's laughter rising above the ambient music. The absolute ordinary texture of 200 people celebrating their pasts, completely unaware that 6 feet away at the back table, they'd all been relieved not to be seated at something else entirely was happening. The structure has a name, Ethan said. Meridian. It appears in the frameworks as a compliance and transfer management entity. On paper, it handles disbursement verification. It's supposed to confirm that designated funds reach their intended programs before signing off on the next funding cycle. In practice, it skims. Methodically. Small enough percentages at each transfer point that no single transaction triggers automatic review. But across 47 programs over 18 months, it adds up to something that requires architecture, Clara said. He looked at her. Yes. Someone built it deliberately, not improvised, planned. Correct. And James Cross is the operator. She watched his face. But Marcus Hale is the money. The stillness that crossed Ethan's face then was the stillness of a man recalibrating in real time. How did you... The briefing document my client forwarded me 2 weeks ago. Cross's name appeared in the redacted sections not redacted enough. And the legal term I flagged in the framework language beneficial transfer allocation, placed in a compliance certification section rather than a disbursement clause, that's not a drafting error. That's intentional misdirection. Whoever wrote it understood exactly where that term would and wouldn't be scrutinized. She held his eyes. I noted Marcus Hale's name because it appeared twice in 1 week in contexts where it should not have appeared at all. I came tonight because I wanted to see what a man who was moving $60 million of humanitarian aid money through a shell entity looked like at a reunion. Ethan stared at her. He looks, Clara said, exactly like what he is. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then quietly, the federal team has been working this case for 14 months. They have the financial architecture partially mapped. They have Cross identified as the operational center. They have Meridian traced as far as the 3rd intermediary layer. What they don't have... He stopped. The language, Clara said. The amendment, 17 pages added to the original humanitarian framework 8 months ago. The federal team believes the amendment is where the fraudulent mechanism is formally embedded, the legal scaffolding that makes the redirection defensible if the case ever reaches a courtroom. But the document is... He paused again, and this time the pause was different. The pause of a man who had been sitting with a frustration for a long time and was about to say it out loud for the first time. It's constructed in a way that their legal team can see is wrong, but cannot articulate why it's wrong with the precision a prosecution requires. The language is sophisticated. Whoever wrote it understood not just law, but the architecture of how legal language creates defensible ambiguity. Clara was very still. How long ago did that amendment surface? She said. 6 weeks. She thought about the invitation on her kitchen table. 6 weeks. The document sent to her secure inbox tonight. Please read this tonight. No name, no context. Just the attachment and 4 words. She thought about the legal term she'd flagged in the briefing document 2 weeks ago, the same term she was now certain that would appear in that amendment. She thought about the way things that seemed like coincidences in her professional experience almost never were. Ethan, she said carefully, who sent me that document tonight? He met her gaze, held it. I don't know who sent it, he said. But I know it was sent from inside a network that has access to the Federal Investigations materials, which means someone inside that network or adjacent to it decided tonight that you needed to see it. They knew my name. They knew considerably more than your name. He leaned forward slightly. Clara, the document came to your secure inbox, not your public contact address, not your professional website. Your secure inbox, the one you use for clients who work in classified adjacent environments. The people who know that address number in the single digits. The ambient noise of the ballroom seemed to recede. Not literally, but the way it receded when she was deep inside a document and the world outside it went gauzy and distant, while the text in front of her sharpened into the only thing that mattered. One of those single digits, she said slowly, decided I was the right person for this document. Yes, which means someone inside or adjacent to a federal investigation made a unilateral decision to route classified adjacent material to a private contractor, me, without formal authorization. Also, yes. That's either desperation, she said, or a level of confidence in my specific capability that overrode procedural caution. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically. The way light shifted. It's both, he said. And the person who sent it, whoever they are, was right. Across the ballroom, Marcus Hale reappeared from a side corridor. He'd been gone 11 minutes. Clara had tracked it. He moved back into the room with the same easy proprietary confidence he'd carried all night, but something underneath it was different now. A tightening. The body language of a man who had received information that required a decision and had not yet made it. He made his call, she said quietly. Ethan didn't turn to look. What's he doing? Smiling at the wrong frequency. His baseline is about 20% looser than what I'm looking at right now. She watched Marcus stop to shake hands with someone near the center of the room, the practiced warmth on full display. He knows something moved tonight. He doesn't know what. He knows I said Meridian. He knows you said Meridian, and that you said it like a man who understood what it meant, which means he's now working out what you know, how you know it, and what you intend to do with it. She paused. He'll want to see you again before the night ends. I know. Ethan's voice was quiet. And when he does, I need to be the thing he's most focused on, not the document. Not the federal investigation. Me, a person he can quantify and manage. He looked at Clara. Which is why what happens in the next 2 hours matters more than anything else that happens in this building tonight. She looked at him steadily. You need me to read the amendment. I need you to do what you do, he said. Not just read it, interpret it. The way you interpret every document for the thing underneath. The intention hiding in the structure. I need to know which clauses are fraudulently constructed and which represent legitimate program architecture that has to be protected even if the prosecution removes everything around it. I need it mapped, Clara. Clearly enough that a federal prosecutor can put it in front of a judge. The ballroom continued its ordinary celebration around them. Clara looked at her notebook, at the pen uncapped in her hand, at the sentence she'd been working on when Ethan sat down at the wrong table, which felt like it had happened approximately 1 lifetime ago. She looked at Ethan Brooks. This white man in his early 40s, with the weathered face and the steady eyes, and the daughter who had told him to stop using her as a reason not to do things. This man who had been carrying something the size of $60 million in stolen humanitarian aid for 14 months alone in the spaces between school drop-off and pickup, without once letting Lily see the weight of it. She thought, this is what it looks like. The thing underneath. The thing you had to read for. My room, she said. Give me 20 minutes to get upstairs first. Come at 10. He nodded once. And Ethan. She looked at him with the direct, undecorated clarity that she applied to everything that mattered. If we do this, my name goes on it. I don't work anonymously. I don't provide background material. If I produce an expert interpretation of that amendment, it is attributed to me and citable in court. She paused. I want to be sure you understand what you're asking. I understand completely, he said. Good. She picked up her bag. Then I'll see you at 10. She moved toward the exit. She passed table 8, where Jennifer Voss was now deep in a story that had the whole group leaning in. She passed David Cho, who caught her eye and gave a small, genuine nod. She passed the edges of the chandelier light through the shift in the current that happened every time she moved through a room that hadn't planned for her and out into the corridor. Behind her, she did not look back. But she knew with the same precision she brought to every document, every word in every language she'd ever worked in, that Ethan Brooks was watching her go. And that Marcus Hale from across the ballroom was watching Ethan. The board was set. She had 20 minutes. She used them. She sat up at the desk in her room laptop, opened the original humanitarian framework she'd downloaded 3 weeks ago, pulled up on the left side of her screen. Her printed copy of the briefing document, annotated in 3 colors, spread to her right. She uncapped a fresh pen, rolled her shoulders, and she waited for the knock. It came at exactly 10 o'clock. 3 knocks. Quiet measured. She opened the door. Ethan came in, sat down at the chair across the desk without being directed to, and opened his laptop. He turned it to face her. The amendment, he said. She looked at the screen. 17 pages. She could see within 30 seconds why the federal legal team was struggling. The document was sophisticated in the specific way that made her work difficult. Not crude misdirection, not obvious fraud, but the subtle architectural kind of manipulation that required you to hold the entire original framework in your mind simultaneously while reading. Testing each clause against its stated function, its structural position, its relationship to every other clause around it. It was the kind of document built by someone who understood that legal language at its most dangerous was not the language that lied. It was the language that told the truth about the wrong thing. She began to read. Not quickly. She never read quickly on first pass. She read the way a surgeon moved deliberately with complete attention, never ahead of where her hands were. She read the preamble. She read the definitional section. She read the first 3 operational clauses, and already she could feel the architecture shifting beneath her, the way the document's surface structure presented one framework while its subsurface was doing something else entirely. Ethan watched her. He didn't speak. He didn't ask if she needed anything. He understood, without being told, that what she was doing required exactly the silence she was operating in, and he gave it to her the way a person gave silence to a musician mid-performance. Completely. Without self-consciousness. 14 minutes in, she said, "There's a split." He leaned forward. "Say more." "The document is not uniformly fraudulent. That's what your federal team missed. They've been looking for the fraud, the way you'd look for a forged signature. Something clearly wrong in an identifiable place. But it's not built that way." She moved her pen to the screen, not touching it, hovering. Clauses 1 through 6 are legitimate. Actual program structure. If your prosecution collapses, you collapse the real infrastructure underneath the fraud, and the programs die regardless of whether you win the case. She moved the pen. Clause 7 is the first seam. Watch the language here pursuant to the Transfer Compliance Verification Standard established in Appendix C. Appendix C does not contain a Transfer Compliance Verification Standard. It contains a reimbursement schedule. The reference is false. And a false internal reference in a legal framework is not a drafting error. "It's a trapdoor," Ethan said. "It's an architectural feature. It creates an authorization pathway that appears to be internally documented, but isn't. Anyone following the paper trail from Clause 7 to Appendix C finds a reimbursement schedule, assumes the compliance standard must be elsewhere, and moves on. The authorization exists in the reference. The reference points to nothing, but the authorization has already been used." She looked up at him. "That's the mechanism. That's how the Meridian transfers are authorized inside the document's own logic without appearing anywhere that triggers review." Ethan sat very still. "How many trap doors?" "I've been reading for 14 minutes. She went back to the screen. Give me more time. He gave her time. At the 30-minute mark, she found the second seam. At 41 minutes, the third and fourth adjacent nested inside a certification clause in a way that made them look like standard compliance language, until you mapped them against the original framework's version of that section and realized 3 key terms had been substituted silently with terms that carried different legal weight in an international disbursement context. At 52 minutes, she stopped. "There's a second voice in this document," she said. Ethan looked up from the transaction records he'd been cross-referencing on his own screen. "What?" "Clause 11. Read the syntax." She turned the laptop toward him. Cross writes with a specific rhythm. I've read enough of his drafting in the original framework to recognize it. Short, declarative constructions. He embeds protective language early in the clause and closes with a passive. It's consistent across every section he wrote. She pointed to Clause 11. This is written by someone else. Different syntactic architecture. The protective language is inside the operative clause, not preceding it. The passive appears in the middle, not the close. And the precision of the legal terminology. She paused. Whoever wrote this clause is better than Cross. Significantly better. Ethan stared at the screen, then at her. You can tell authorship from sentence structure. I can tell this is a different author the same way you can tell a financial irregularity from a pattern of transactions. The signature is in the structure. She held his eyes. There's a second architect, someone Cross is working with or working under who drafted this specific provision. She paused. Who else is involved in this that you haven't told me? And the silence that followed was 3 seconds long. Yeah, and then Ethan said carefully, There's a name. It's appeared twice at the edges of the investigation and disappeared both times. No confirmed role. No institutional affiliation. Just a name in the background of the background. He paused. Reeves. No first name confirmed. Believed to operate in legal architecture. International frameworks, treaty language, compliance structure design. The kind of person who doesn't practice law in a way that creates a visible record. They build systems for other people to use. Clara looked back at Clause 11. Read it one more time. Then Reeves, she said, is the person your federal case is actually missing. She turned to face him fully. Cross is the operator. Marcus is the money. But this, she touched the screen. This is the mind. Whoever wrote Clause 11 designed the system that makes everything else defensible. You remove Cross, you remove Marcus. This system keeps running as long as Reeves is building the architecture. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. She read his face the way she'd been reading faces for 20 years. She saw something she hadn't seen there before. Not fear exactly. Not certainty. The expression of a man who has just heard someone else articulate the thing he'd suspected for a long time, but couldn't prove and couldn't frame precisely enough to say out loud. You already knew, she said. I suspected something like it. His voice was quiet. I couldn't get there precisely enough to put in front of the federal team without sounding like speculation. He looked at the clause. You've been in this document for under an hour. It's what I do, she said simply. I know. He said it without inflation, without the for someone in your position layered underneath it, without the particular recalibration she'd watched cross 100 faces over 20 years when they encountered her competence and had to update the file. He just said, I know, like it was a fact he'd arrived at and had no need to qualify. She turned back to the screen. Then let's finish it, she said. They worked. She went through every remaining clause, talking as she moved each provision, its stated function, its actual function. The places where the language held, and the places where it had been engineered to do something other than what it declared. Ethan cross-referenced transaction records pulling up payment classifications and commercial filings in real time. When she needed a specific figure, he had it in 30 seconds. When she needed to understand how a Meridian payment category had been classified in the company's external filings, he pulled the document before she finished the question. They were good at this together, not in a way that needed to be remarked on, in the plain functional way that two competencies fit against each other and produce something neither could produce alone. She read the language of the system. He read the financial behavior of the system. Between them, the full picture assembled clause by clause, transaction by transaction, until the architecture of the fraud was not a suspicion or an inference, but a mapped, documented, articulable structure. At 1:40 in the morning, Clara set down her pen. "I have it," she said. Ethan looked up. The full separation. Every fraudulent clause in the amendment with the linguistic evidence for why it's fraudulent and how it connects to the Meridian payment mechanism. And every legitimate clause, the real program structure that has to survive any prosecution. She looked at him steadily. Your federal team can freeze the fraudulent channel without touching the program accounts. They can build the prosecution without collapsing the infrastructure that's actually keeping 47 programs alive. She paused. And the final extraction, the last Meridian payment scheduled before the freeze, I can give them the legal basis to block it, specifically in language that cannot be argued around. Because the authorization in Clause 7 references something that doesn't exist, and I can prove it. Ethan was looking at her with an expression she had never seen directed at her before. Not admiration, though it was that. Not gratitude, though it was that too. Something quieter. The look of a man who had just watched someone change the shape of something irreversible and who understood the full weight of what that meant. "How do we get this to your team?" she said. He took a breath. "I need you to put your name on it." He held her eyes. Not anonymously, not background material. A formal expert interpretation attributed to you, citable in federal court. A pause. "It makes you visible in this, Clara. Publicly. Eventually. It may make you a target for the people who don't want this prosecution to succeed. Reeves, whoever Reeves is working for. They will know your name." She was quiet for one moment. "They already know my name," she said. "The document came to my secure inbox. Someone put it in my path before I walked into that ballroom tonight. The question of invisibility was settled before the evening started." He held her gaze. Long. Steady. "Okay," he said. He picked up his phone and called his federal contact. It was almost 2 a.m. The call connected on the second ring. The ring of people who had been waiting for something they weren't sure was coming. "I have something," Ethan said, and his voice in that moment was the voice of a man who had been carrying something alone for too long and had just set it down somewhere solid. Full expert interpretation. Attributed citable. Linguistic map of the entire amendment fraudulent architecture separated from legitimate program structure. Legal basis to block the final extraction before it executes. He paused, listening. Then, "Her name is Clara Bennett. International Legal Linguistics. She'll be the clearest voice in any courtroom you put her in." He looked at Clara while he said it. "Trust me on this one." "You ready, see, Yinamada?" He ended the call. Clara was already formatting the document. Then on outside somewhere far below them in the Whitmore Grand, the reunion was winding down. The chandeliers were dimming. 200 people who had come to remember a shared past were finding their coats, their cars, the weariness of a long evening that had required performance. They were going home. They had no idea what had happened in a room above them. They had no idea what the woman at table 14 had been carrying when she arrived, or what she had just done with it. Clara read through the document one final time, looking for the crack in the argument, the unsupported inference, the place where the language hadn't carried the weight she'd asked it to. There were none. The work was clean. She sent it. Then she set down her pen, and for the first time in the 4 hours since Ethan knocked on her door, she sat back. Outside, the night was doing its quiet work on the city. Below, a reunion was ending. In a federal operations center, somewhere across a time zone or two, phones were beginning to ring. And Clara Bennett, at a desk in a room no one at that ballroom tonight would have imagined her in, looked at the outgoing message still open on her screen. She felt something she didn't immediately have a word for. Not triumph, triumph was too sharp, too noisy for what this was. Something quieter. The particular feeling of having been exactly what you were capable of being in exactly the moment it mattered. Ethan was still across the table, not on his phone, not moving, just present in the way he'd been present all night, without agenda, without performance, in the plain and steady way of a man who had learned that showing up fully was the thing, and that everything else followed from that, or it didn't. "It sent," she said. "I know," he said. His voice was quiet. "How are you doing?" The question surprised her, not because it was remarkable in itself, because of the way he asked it, without the subtext, without the given everything layered underneath. Just the clean question aimed at her directly, expecting a real answer. She considered it honestly. "I'm tired," she said, "and I'm something else. I don't have the right word for it yet." He nodded. "The right word usually shows up later." "It does," she agreed. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, read whatever the message said. His jaw did a single controlled tightening, the same tightening she'd watched in the ballroom when Marcus Hale put his hand on her chair, and Ethan absorbed it without showing what it cost him. But this time she read it differently. Not the tightening of bad news, the tightening of confirmation. "They've got it," he said. "The team is moving." The room held that sentence for a moment. Then his phone buzzed again. He looked at it. And this time, something sharp moved through his face, quick, cold, contained before it could fully surface. She caught it. She always caught things. "What?" she said. Ethan looked up. His voice was perfectly even. "Marcus Hale just left the hotel." A pause. "He wasn't alone." "Who was with him?" Clara said. Ethan was already on his feet, phone to his ear, moving toward the window with the contained urgency of a man who had learned long ago that speed and panic were not the same thing, and that confusing them cost you the clarity you needed most. He held up one finger. "Give me a second," and spoke quietly into the phone. "Description. How long ago? Which direction?" He listened. His free hand went still at his side. Completely still, the way a person's body went still when the information arriving was worse than what they'd prepared for. "Stay on it. Call me the moment there's a location." He ended the call and turned around. "A man," he said. "Mid-50s, gray suit, no tie. They left through the side entrance, the one that bypasses the main lobby." Clara had already pulled her laptop back toward her. "The side entrance has no camera coverage." "No," Ethan said. "It doesn't." "That's not an accident." "No." He crossed back to the desk. "It's not." She looked at him steadily. Marcus didn't come to this reunion to celebrate 20 years. He came because something was happening tonight that required him to be present in this building. She paused. The man he left with, whoever he is, either was already here when the evening started or arrived specifically to meet him. This hotel was a meeting point, Ethan. Not incidental. Chosen. Ethan sat down. The controlled tightening was back in his jaw, but his eyes were working. She could see it, the disciplined sequential logic running behind them. "Which means, when I said Meridian to him downstairs, I didn't just provoke a phone call." "You provoked a physical meeting," she said. "Which means one of two things. Either we accelerated their timeline." She held his eyes. "Or we forced their hand. If they're meeting in person at 2 in the morning, Ethan said, they're not doing it because they feel in control. No, they're doing it because something tonight made them feel they needed to move. And the question is whether that something is the document I just sent." She watched his face. "Or you. The document shouldn't be visible to them yet," he said immediately. "The contact I called has been the most airtight person in this investigation for 8 months. If there were a leak on that side, we'd have known about it long before tonight." "Then it's you," Clara said. "The Meridian reference. You gave him enough to know that someone had access to the capital flow structure. Not the full picture, but enough to make him move, enough to make him need a face-to-face with whoever is coordinating this, because a phone call wasn't sufficient for the decision they now need to make. Ethan was quiet for a moment, and she watched him work through it. The same focused, sequential logic she applied to documents applied to the movement of people and consequences and time. She recognized the quality of it. A disciplined mind that didn't skip steps. If they're meeting to decide whether to accelerate the final extraction, he said, we have less than 72 hours. How much less depends on the coordinator's authority and how fast Meridian can execute the payment mechanism. She was already typing. You need to call your financial crimes contact. Now. Not the federal investigator, the person tracking the Meridian accounts directly. Marcus has moved, which means there may be an attempt to execute the final extraction tonight or first thing tomorrow morning before any freeze order can be processed. Ethan was already dialing. Then the call connected in 4 seconds. He spoke quickly and clearly. No wasted words, no reconstruction of background. He could assume his contact already had. Just the operational update. Marcus Hale had left the Whitmore Grand at approximately 2:06 a.m. with an unidentified male mid-50s gray suit. Side exit. No camera. Possible acceleration of the Meridian extraction timeline. Requesting immediate monitoring escalation on all Meridian-adjacent accounts and the authorization pathways Clara had mapped in the document, transmitted 20 minutes prior. He listened for 40 seconds. His expression didn't change, but Clara watched the stillness in his shoulders shift, the particular shift of a person receiving information that is better than feared and worse than hoped. Understood, he said. Keep me on the account movement. Anything activates I need to know before it clears. He ended the call. The accounts are being watched, he said. But the freeze order requires a federal signature and the duty judge won't be reachable until 6 a.m. Clara looked at her clock. It was 2:14 a.m. 3 hours and 46 minutes. Yes. And the Meridian payment mechanism can execute in 40 minutes once it's initiated, end to end, including the 3-layer intermediary pass-through 40 minutes, and the money is in a jurisdiction where recovery requires a separate international legal process that takes months. He looked at her. If Marcus and whoever he's meeting tonight decide to initiate before 6 a.m., then the document I sent won't matter, Clara said, because there'll be nothing left to freeze. Right. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the specific pressurized silence of two people who understood exactly what was at stake, and were both separately and simultaneously running through every variable they had left to work with. Then Clara said, "Who is the duty judge?" Ethan looked at her. What? The federal duty judge. Who is it tonight? He pulled up something on his phone, scanned it. Hartwell. District Judge Patricia Hartwell. She's been on the rotation for. Does your federal contact have her emergency line? Yes, but Clara, a duty judge at 2 in the morning for a freeze order requires. It requires sufficient documented basis for imminent financial harm, she said. Which is what I spent the last 4 hours producing. She met his eyes. Call your contact back. Tell them the basis document has been transmitted, it's attributed and citable, and there is documented reason to believe the extraction timeline has accelerated to within the next 4 hours. Request emergency judicial contact. She paused. Let them decide whether it's sufficient. Don't make that decision for them. Ethan looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he called. The conversation was short, tight. Ethan gave the information, made the request, and waited while his contact consulted with someone on the other end. Clara watched his face. She was good at waiting. 20 years of precision work had made her very good at the specific discipline of staying still while something important happened that she could not accelerate. They're going to try, Ethan said after he ended the call. No guarantees on the judge, but they're going to try. Good. She looked at her screen. Then we wait. He sat down across from her, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had been through something together and were now in the particular suspended space between the doing and the knowing whether it had worked. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it, read it. "They found the car," he said. Clara looked up. "Marcus and the unidentified male. They're at a private residence in Georgetown. The address—" He stopped. Something crossed his face that she hadn't seen there before. Something that wasn't shock. He was not a man who shocked easily, but was the expression of a man encountering a fact that restructured everything around it. "What?" she said. He looked up from the phone. "The address is registered to a legal consulting firm. Private international practice, no public client list." He paused. "The firm's name is Reeves and Associates." The room went completely still. Not metaphorically. She felt it, the actual physical stillness of a space in which something large had just landed and hadn't finished landing. She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. "Reeves isn't an operative working at the edges," she said slowly. "No," Ethan said. "Reeves is the center. Marcus and Cross and Meridian, they're all working inside a structure that Reeves built and owns." She looked at her screen. At Clause 11. At the syntactic signature she'd identified 3 hours ago, the writing of someone better, significantly better than Cross. Reeves wrote the amendment. "Yes?" "And Marcus is at Reeves's house right now." "Yes." She let that settle for exactly the time it needed. Then, "Call your contact again. The Georgetown address needs to go to whoever is coordinating physical surveillance. And the name Reeves and Associates needs to be in front of the federal team within the next 30 minutes. Ethan was already dialing. Yeah. The next 40 minutes moved in the specific suspended way of a situation in which everything important was happening somewhere else, and the only available action was to stay present, stay ready, and not fill the silence with noise. Ethan made 3 calls. Clara reviewed her document twice, looking for anything she might sharpen. She found 2 places where the language could be more precise, and updated, then transmitted the revision. At 3:02 a.m. Ethan's phone rang. He answered immediately, listened for 11 seconds. "Say that again?" He listened for 4 more seconds. His jaw did the thing, the single controlled tightening, and then something underneath it released, and the release was visible, and Clara understood what it meant before he said a word. He ended the call, looked at her. "Judge Hartwell signed the freeze order," he said. "At 2:58 a.m., the Meridian accounts are locked." He paused. "All of them, including the extraction authorization that was apparently in preliminary processing as of 30 minutes ago." Clara held that. Let it arrive at full size. "They tried to initiate," she said. At 2:31 a.m., 22 minutes after Marcus arrived at the Georgetown address. The execution failed because the freeze hit the authorization pathway before it could clear the second intermediary. He looked at her steadily. "The document you sent, the linguistic map of the authorization mechanism, the evidence that the Clause 7 reference was false, that's what gave the duty contact sufficient basis to make the emergency judicial request. Hartwell read your analysis. Your analysis is what got the signature." She was quiet for a moment. 47 programs. The food security operations, the medical supply chains, the emergency shelter infrastructure in 3 post-conflict regions. The hundreds of thousands of people at the end of those programs, waking up tomorrow morning with no idea how close it had come. That was what success looked like when the work was real. Not a headline. Not a moment. Just continuation. Things that needed to keep happening, kept happening. "Where is Marcus now?" she said. "Still at the Georgetown address. He doesn't know the freeze hit yet. He thinks the extraction executed." A pause. "He's going to find out in approximately 2 hours when his financial team opens in the morning and finds locked accounts." "And Reeves?" Ethan's expression was careful. "The federal team is deciding right now what to do with the Georgetown location. Physical surveillance is in place. No action until the prosecutors can coordinate." He looked at her. "Which is why I need you in Washington tomorrow." She looked at him. "The federal team needs you in the room," he said. Not on a call, not as a written submission. In the room. To walk the prosecutors through the amendment analysis yourself. Answer their questions directly. He paused. I know it's 6 hours from now. I know it's not what you planned when you called the car service last Friday and came to a reunion you almost skipped. I'll be there, she said. He looked at her. Just like that. You have 47 programs and a 4-hour window before Marcus Hale realizes he lost, she said. Yes, just like that. Something moved through his face. The unguarded thing, the bone-level thing that a man showed when he stopped managing his expression, because the moment had outpaced the management. It was brief. He pulled it back. But she caught it the way she always caught things, and she filed it in the place where she kept what actually mattered. I'll make the calls, he said. He made them. She listened to the shape of the conversations without trying to parse every word, the tonal architecture of a person who was trusted, and knew how to use that trust efficiently without waste. By 3:40 a.m. it was arranged. A car at 7, a federal building in Washington, a room full of prosecutors at 9. When he ended the last call, they sat for a moment in the particular quiet of people who have completed something large and are now in the space just after it. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I won't. Neither will I. She looked at him. Tell me about Lily. He looked surprised for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at her in the way she had come to recognize as his most genuine expression, the one without any management in it, and he said, What do you want to know? Whatever you want to say. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was doing what cities did at 3:40 in the morning, its low, persistent machinery, the hum of infrastructure and insomnia, and the particular restlessness of a place that never fully stopped. She could hear it faintly through the window. She found it grounding. She started reading at 4, he said. Not being read to, reading. I found her one morning with a chapter book open in her lap, and she'd taught herself. I don't know how. She'd watched enough apparently that she'd assembled the mechanism on her own. A small, helpless sort of warmth moved across his face. I cried. In the bathroom so she wouldn't see. And when I came out she looked at me and said, Dad, your eyes are red. And I said allergies. And she said, we don't have any allergies. And she went back to her book. Clara laughed. It was a real laugh, the involuntary kind, the kind her body produced before her mind had approved the choice. It surprised her slightly. She hadn't laughed like that in a while. She sounds, Clara said, like someone who is going to be very difficult to fool. She already is, Ethan said. She's 9 and she already is. It's a gift, Clara said. Even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. He looked at his coffee cup, long empty. She asked me last week what I was working on. I said it was complicated. She said, that's not an answer, that's a postponement. 9 years old. She's right, Clara said. That's not an answer. That's a postponement. I know. He looked at her. I told her I was trying to help some people who needed help, and that it was taking a long time because the people making it difficult were very good at making things difficult. He paused. She thought about it. Then she said, but you're good at things too, right? And I said yes. And she said, okay then. And she went back to her book. Clara held that for a moment. She trusts you, she said. She does, he said quietly. That's the thing I'm most careful with. Of everything I'm carrying, that's the thing I won't let drop. At 4:15 a.m. Ethan's phone rang again. He looked at the screen. Something shifted in his face. It's the lead prosecutor. He answered. Clara watched him listen. The call lasted 3 minutes. He asked 2 questions, short, specific, the questions of someone who had prepared for this conversation so thoroughly that he needed almost nothing clarified. At the end he said, she'll be there, 9 o'clock, and ended the call. He set the phone down. They've identified Reeves, he said. Clara went still. Clara went foul. Full name. Background. The legal consulting firm is a front. It's been operating as a framework design entity for 4 separate financial fraud structures across 2 continents over the past 7 years. He paused. Reeves has been building the architecture, not just for Marcus. Marcus is one client. He looked at her. The amendment you analyzed tonight isn't the only document with Reeves's syntactic signature. The federal team had 3 other documents they couldn't crack. 3 other amendment frameworks. 3 other humanitarian aid structures with the same architectural manipulation, different operators, different money, same mind. He held her eyes. They want you to look at all 3. She was quiet for a long moment. When? She said. Tomorrow. After the 9 o'clock session, if you're willing. She looked at the screen. At her document. At the 16 hours of work she'd already done tonight, and the additional work waiting on the other side of a few hours and a drive to Washington. She thought about the UNESCO deadline she'd told herself was unbreakable. She thought about what unbreakable actually meant, and what it meant in comparison to what was sitting in front of her right now. Yes, she said. Ethan looked at her with the same expression he'd had when she'd said just like that the first time. Like the answer had arrived before he'd fully finished being prepared for it. Clara. The documents need to be read, she said simply. I can read them, so yes. He nodded once. At 5:30 a.m., the light outside the window changed the specific, almost imperceptible shift from the black of deep night to the dark blue of early morning, the hour when the city began to remember it had things to do. Clara closed her laptop, capped her pen, sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Ethan said, "The car will be here at 7. I know. You should eat something before we leave." I know that too. He looked at her. The exhaustion was visible on him now, not weakness, but the honest physical evidence of a man who had been running on something other than sleep for a long time and had just spent the night burning through whatever reserve was left. She suspected she looked the same. She found she didn't mind. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. When you were reading the amendment tonight..." He paused. "Was there a moment when you knew, before you had the full map, before Clause 7, before Reeves was there, a moment early on when you knew what you were looking at?" She thought about it honestly. 20 seconds into the preamble, she said. The word choice in the 3rd sentence, a term that should have appeared in the operative section, had been moved to the framing language. It was small. Most people would have read past it. She paused. "But I've read enough documents built to deceive that I know the feeling. It's like a room where the furniture is slightly wrong. Everything looks fine. But your body knows before your mind does that something has been moved." He looked at her for a long moment. "Your body knew in 20 seconds what a federal legal team couldn't confirm in 6 weeks. My body has been trained for 20 years, she said. It's not remarkable. It's just accumulated practice. It's not just anything, he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze with that same steady, direct quality he'd had since the moment he sat down at the wrong table and decided to stay. No performance. No subtext. Just the plain weight of what he meant delivered without decoration. She didn't have a word for what she felt in that moment. She noted the absence of the word, filed it in the place where she kept things that hadn't yet revealed their full significance, and turned back to the window where the morning was beginning its slow, honest arrival. Her phone lit up on the desk. A message. Unknown sender. The same encrypted routing as the original document. She opened it. 4 words. Thank you. They know. She stared at the screen, turned it toward Ethan without a word. He read it. His jaw tightened. Then he looked up at her, and what was in his face was not reassurance and was not alarm. It was the sober, clear-eyed expression of a man who had just watched a door close behind them. They know we're coming, she said. Yes, he said. Reeves knows. Yes. She set the phone down, put both hands flat on the desk, looked at the morning coming through the window. Then she looked at Ethan. Good, she said. He blinked. Good. I spent 20 years being invisible in rooms that didn't see me coming. She held his eyes. I'd like them to see me coming this time. I'd like them to know exactly what's walking through that door. She paused. Let them know. It won't change what I do when I get there. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, with the warmth of a man who had not expected this night to give him what it had given him, he said, No, I don't imagine it will. The car arrived at 7 on the dot. Clara had slept 90 minutes. She knew because she'd set an alarm for 90 minutes, closed her eyes, and when the alarm sounded, her body felt exactly the way it felt after 90 minutes of sleep, not rested, not ruined, but functional. She had learned a long time ago that functional was enough. Functional was what you worked with when the work mattered more than the comfort. She'd eaten a banana and 2 cups of coffee from the room's small machine, changed into the spare clothes she always packed because 20 years of traveling for work had taught her that the day after unexpected things happened was always the day you needed the spare clothes. Dark gray, structured, chosen for the same reason she'd chosen the navy dress the night before. She knew what people's eyes would do when she came through the door, and she wanted everything above the chair to be unassailable. Ethan was in the lobby when she came out of the elevator. He'd changed too. Different jacket, same steady eyes, the specific quality of alertness that came not from adequate sleep, but from the kind of focus that overrode sleep when the situation required it. He had 2 cups of coffee from the hotel restaurant. He handed her one without a word. She took it without a word. They went to the car. The drive to Washington was an hour and 20 minutes. They spent 40 minutes of it going through the materials. Ethan's contact had transmitted overnight summaries of the 3 additional amendment documents that the federal team wanted Clara to review. She read the executive summaries on her phone with the focused economy of someone accustomed to processing dense material in suboptimal conditions. Moving vehicle, inadequate sleep, bad coffee. None of it touched the quality of her attention. The second document is the most complex, she said around the 40-minute mark. The syntactic signature is cleaner. Reeves had more time or less pressure when this one was drafted. The misdirection is deeper in the structure. It's going to take longer. How much longer? Depends on whether the federal team has the original framework it was amending. If I'm reading the amendment against the original 2 to 3 hours. If I'm reading the amendment in isolation. She paused. Longer. Ethan made a call, confirmed that all original frameworks would be available, ended the call. They'll have everything you need. Good. She went back to the summary. At the 50-minute mark, Ethan's phone rang. He looked at the screen. The tightening she'd learned to read crossed his face. He answered. When? Not a question. A demand quiet and precise. He listened for 6 seconds. How far? 4 seconds. Is it confirmed or is it a position? 3 seconds. All right, we're 40 minutes out. Don't move until I'm in the room. He ended the call. Clara looked at him. Marcus. His financial team reached him at 6:45 a.m. He knows the accounts are frozen. Ethan's voice was level, flat. The voice of a man delivering a briefing. He made 2 calls in the first 8 minutes. One to his personal attorney. One to a number the surveillance team hadn't seen before new contact encrypted routing. Reeves, Clara said. Almost certainly. They're tracing it now. He paused. And Marcus requested an emergency meeting with the Foundation's board of directors. He's calling it a regulatory compliance matter. She looked at him. He's going to try to run a cover story before the prosecution can move. Yes. He needs the board confused enough and loyal enough to create institutional noise around the investigation. If the board publicly defends the Foundation's integrity before the charges are filed, it muddies the narrative. Ethan's jaw was set. The prosecutors need to move on the filing timeline. That's what the 9 o'clock meeting is about. Then let's not be late, she said, and turned back to her phone. They arrived at the federal building at 8:47 a.m. The car pulled up. Ethan was out and moving to her side before the driver had fully stopped. Not with the fussy, performative helpfulness she'd spent 20 years absorbing and deflecting, but with the practical, unremarked efficiency of a man who noticed what was needed and provided it without making the provision into a statement. She didn't comment on it. She didn't need to. The building's accessibility was functional. Not excellent. Not the kind of space that had been designed with the full understanding of what accessibility actually meant in practice, but functional ramp in the right place elevator that worked. No one in the lobby offering help in that particular tone. She navigated it cleanly and kept pace with Ethan through the corridor. The conference room was on the 4th floor. They came through the door at 8:54 a.m., and 5 people already seated. Clara read them in approximately 10 seconds, the practiced automatic assessment of a professional who had spent 2 decades walking into rooms that hadn't planned for her and needing to understand the room's power structure before anyone in it had decided what to do with her presence. Lead prosecutor. End of the table. A woman in her early 50s. Dark suit. The kind of stillness that came from decades of understanding that the person who controlled the pace of a room controlled everything else. Her name, Clara would learn in the next 60 seconds, was Diane Mercer. To her left, 2 assistant prosecutors, both in their 30s, both with the particular combination of intelligence and exhaustion that federal work produced after enough years. Across from them, a financial crimes analyst. The person Clara understood immediately, who had been living inside the Meridian transaction data for the past 14 months and was going to be the most precise person in the room about the numbers. And at the far end, a man Clara didn't recognize, early 60s gray at the temples, the quiet self-containment of someone who was there to observe more than participate. Ethan introduced her. Clara Bennett, International Legal Linguistics. She produced the amendment analysis you received last night. Diane Mercer looked at Clara the way Clara liked to be looked at, directly, without the micro-recalibration, without the pause. The look of a woman who had long ago decided that what people were was more interesting than what they appeared to be. Ms. Bennett, I've been reading your work since 3 this morning. She paused. It's exceptional. Thank you, Clara said. She moved to the chair at the table that gave her the clearest sightline to the document screens on the wall, positioned herself, opened her laptop. Where do you want to start? Mercer looked at her for exactly 1 second. The second of a person recalibrating not away from competence, but toward it, updating the room's operating assumptions in real time. Then she said, Clause 7. Walk us through it from the beginning. Clara walked them through it. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping, the way she talked when she was inside a document she knew, completely not performing expertise, just moving through what she understood with the directness of someone who had no interest in sounding impressive, and every interest in being clear. She explained Clause 7, the false internal reference, the authorization pathway that appeared documented but wasn't, the mechanism by which Meridian transfers were authorized inside the document's own logic, without appearing in any position that triggered automatic review. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the assistant prosecutors said, How do you prove the reference is intentionally false, rather than a drafting error? The syntactic context, she said immediately. A drafting error in a false internal reference appears in one of 2 patterns. Either the wrong appendix is cited because the author confused numbering, or the referenced content exists, but in a different form than expected. In both cases, the surrounding language treats the reference as if it leads somewhere real because the author believed it did. She looked at him steadily. In Clause 7, the surrounding language is constructed to route the reader's attention away from the reference point as quickly as possible. The sentence that contains the false reference is deliberately dense 3 embedded clauses that create enough reading friction that most reviewers process the reference as a citation note and move on without following it. That density is intentional. I can demonstrate it by mapping the syntactic complexity of Clause 7 against every other clause in the document. She paused. The average sentence in this amendment has 1.4 embedded clauses. Clause 7 has 4.7. That's not a drafting style. That's camouflage. The financial crimes analyst looked up from his notes for the first time. You can quantify that. I already have, she said. It's in the document I transmitted last night, table 3, page 9. Ma'am. He opened his laptop, found it, read it. His expression moved in the specific way of someone encountering a piece of evidence they'd been searching for without knowing what shape it would be in when they found it. This is exactly what we needed for the Mercado filing, he said, half to himself, half to the room. Mercer was already writing. Ms. Bennett, I'm going to ask you to stay through the afternoon. I know, Clara said. I have 3 additional documents to review. Ethan told me last night. Mercer looked at Ethan briefly, then back at Clara. The 3 additional amendments represent different operators, different geographic jurisdictions. But if Reeves designed the architecture for all 4, then they'll have the same syntactic signature, Clara said. The same structural fingerprint in the places where the misdirection is embedded, which means I can identify Reeves's authorship across all 4 documents, and you have not one fraud case, but a pattern of practice across 4 jurisdictions and 7 years. She held Mercer's eyes. Which is a different order of charge. The room was very quiet. Then the man at the far end of the table, who had not yet said a single word, said, Ms. Bennett. His voice was measured, careful. The voice of someone who chose words the way she chose them for precision, not decoration. I need to ask you directly. Are you prepared to testify? Clara looked at him. Who are you? A pause. Deputy Attorney General's office, he said. I've been observing this investigation for 6 months. I came last night when the freeze order was signed. He paused. Your analysis is going to be the evidentiary spine of this prosecution. If Reeves's legal team challenges the linguistic methodology, and you will be cross-examined by some of the most aggressive defense attorneys in the country in a federal courtroom, in front of a judge who will be watching every word you say for precision and consistency. Another pause. I need to know if you understand that, and if you're prepared for it. Clara looked at him for a moment. I've spent 20 years, she said, being cross-examined by rooms that didn't think I belonged in them. I'm quite good at it. She held his gaze. Yes, I'll testify. Something moved through his face, not quite surprise. The expression of a man who had prepared for a different answer and was now updating. He nodded once. Then we proceed. At 10:15 a.m., Ethan's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. His expression went flat in the specific way she'd learned meant the information was significant, and he was deciding how to handle it in real time. He stood, moved to the corner of the room, spoke in a voice too low to hear. 2 minutes. He came back. Marcus held his board meeting, he said. Mercer looked up from her notes. 45 minutes ago. He told the board that the federal freeze on the foundation accounts was the result of a technical irregularity in the Meridian Compliance Certification, a paperwork issue being resolved through standard regulatory channels. Ethan's voice was even. He told them the funds would be unfrozen within 72 hours. He told them the foundation's humanitarian programs were in no danger, and that any external reports to the contrary were the result of misinformation. Silence around the table. He's buying time, the financial crimes analyst said. He's buying trust, Clara said. Everyone looked at her. He doesn't need the board to believe him permanently. He needs them to believe him long enough to create public institutional cover before the charges are filed. If the board issues a statement defending the foundation's integrity today before any public filing, it creates a narrative anchor that the defense can use for months. She paused. How fast can you file? Mercer looked at the deputy AG's observer. Something passed between them. Quick practiced the communication of two people who had navigated the same institutional terrain long enough that certain conversations happened without words. 48 hours, the observer said. Marcus is betting on 72, Ethan said. Then he's going to lose that bet, Mercer said. And her voice in that moment was the voice of a woman who had been doing this work long enough to know exactly what she was capable of and had no need to perform certainty she actually felt. She looked at Clara. I need you on the second document by noon. I'll need the original framework it amended. It's already on your secure access portal. Ethan set it up this morning. She paused. The access credentials are in the folder he transmitted to you at 6 a.m. Clara looked at Ethan. He looked back with the expression of a man who had thought ahead, acted on what he thought, and hadn't needed to announce it. She opened the folder on her laptop, found the credentials, logged in. The original framework appeared on her screen. Give me 90 minutes, she said. She worked. The room moved around her. Mercer on calls, the assistant prosecutors, drafting the financial analyst cross-referencing Ethan in and out of the corridor, managing the surveillance updates that came in every 30 minutes. None of it touched Clara's attention. She had learned in 20 years of working in the middle of noise and urgency, and the ambient pressure of things that mattered, to be completely alone inside a document, regardless of what surrounded her. It was not a skill she'd been taught. It was a thing she'd built the way she'd built everything out of necessity over time, without anyone's permission. At 11:52 a.m. she looked up. The second document, she said into a brief lull in the room's activity, has Reeves's signature in 4 places. It's cleaner than the First Amendment. The misdirection is embedded 2 levels deeper. But the syntactic architecture is identical. Same false reference mechanism. Different appendix. Same camouflage density pattern in the containing clause. She paused. And there's something else. Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing. The second document was drafted before the first. The language in the First Amendment references a framework convention that only appears in the second document, which means Reeves built this system in a specific sequence with the second document, establishing the foundational architecture that the first document then activated. She looked at Mercer. This isn't 4 separate frauds. It's one system built in stages across 4 jurisdictions. Reeves didn't build a scheme for Marcus Hale. Reeves built an infrastructure, and Marcus was one of the clients who bought into it. The room was very quiet. The financial analyst said slowly, if it's one system, then every prosecution is stronger with all 4 documents and evidence, Clara said. Because each one demonstrates that the method was consistent, deliberate, and repeated. That's not a mistake. That's a practice. Mercer stood up. She walked to the window and stood there for a moment with her back to the room. When she turned around, her expression was the expression of a person who has just seen the shape of something much larger than they were expecting, and is now deciding how to hold it. I need to make a call, she said. Give me 10 minutes. She left the room. In her absence, the observer stood up and walked to Clara's end of the table. He sat in the chair 2 seats away from her. He said without preamble, "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked at him. You can ask. The document, the one that came to your secure inbox last Friday night. He held her gaze. You told Ethan you had no idea who sent it. That's what he told us. A pause. Is that still your answer? Bay. She looked at him for a long moment. He was good, she could see it. The question looked casual. It wasn't. It was the question of a man who had been doing this work long enough to understand that the most important information often lived in the space between what people said and what they knew. I have a hypothesis, she said carefully. I don't have evidence for it. And in my profession, a hypothesis without evidence is a direction to look, not a thing to state. Tell me your hypothesis. She held his eyes. Someone inside the federal investigation or adjacent to it has known for some time that the amendment analysis was the missing piece. They also knew that the federal legal team couldn't produce that analysis internally, not because of competence, but because the kind of expertise required was outside the team's specific training. She paused. They needed someone who worked at the intersection of legal linguistics and international humanitarian framework design, someone whose name would carry evidentiary weight in a federal courtroom. Someone who had spent enough years in classified adjacent work to understand the stakes and not flinch from them. Another pause. And someone who had personal reasons to understand what it meant when institutions moved money away from the people who needed it most through systems designed to look legitimate from the outside. The observer looked at her. You think it was someone who knew your history. I think it was someone who did their research, she said, which is not the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, if that hypothesis is correct, and I'm not confirming or denying, then the person who sent that document made a significant procedural violation in routing federal case material to an unauthorized civilian contact. Yes, Clara said. They did. How do you feel about that? Yeah, she thought about it honestly. About the invitation on her kitchen table for 6 weeks. About the stubborn, unreasonable part of herself that had known, in the way that part of her always knew things, before the rest of her caught up, that there was something on the other side of this night that was hers. I feel, she said, that whoever they are, they were right about me. And I feel that the 47 programs that are still running this morning, because the freeze order held, are a sufficient argument for their decision. She paused. I'll leave the procedural question to people whose job it is. The observer looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted, not softness exactly, but a kind of recognition. The expression of a man who had just encountered a person who was precisely what they appeared to be, and had the rare experience in his line of work of finding that more surprising than its opposite. Fair enough, he said, and moved back to his end of the table. Mercer came back at 12:18 p.m. She sat down, looked at the room, and said, We're filing in 36 hours. The Deputy AG has approved the Consolidated Framing 1 system, 4 documents, 7 years of practice. All 4 amendment analyses will be submitted as a unified evidentiary package under Ms. Bennett's attribution. She looked at Clara directly. I need the 3rd and 4th documents completed by 6 p.m. tonight. Understood, Clara said. And I need you available for a 2-hour deposition prep session this afternoon with the lead litigation team. They need to understand your methodology well enough to defend it under cross-examination before you take the stand. Also understood. Ethan, from his position near the wall where he'd been standing for the past 10 minutes, said Diane. The board statement. Mercer looked at him. I know. If Marcus gets a statement out before we file, I know Ethan. Her voice was not sharp. It was the voice of someone who carried things without putting them down, and was tired of people handing her additional things to hold. We have a media hold request in with the Foundation's PR contact, someone the investigative team has been working with quietly for 6 weeks. If Marcus moves on a statement, we'll know in time to counter it. She looked at him. Trust the process. I trust the process, he said. I don't trust Marcus Hale. Those are not mutually exclusive, she said. Sit down. He sat down. At 1:30 p.m., something happened that no one in the room had been expecting. Ethan's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face went very still, the complete absolute stillness that was different from all the other kinds of stillness she'd seen from him. The stillness of a person receiving something that hit a register below, strategy below analysis, below the professional management of significant information. Bas, he answered. Listened for 4 seconds. Said, say that again. Listened for 3 more seconds. Then, are you sure? Not a question. The way people said, are you sure, when they already knew the answer was yes, and needed 1 more second before accepting it. He ended the call. Looked up. Reeves, he said, turned themselves in. Complete silence. 20 minutes ago, voluntary surrender to the FBI field office in Georgetown. He paused. Reeves's attorney contacted the federal prosecutor's office simultaneously with a proffer letter. Full cooperation. In exchange for... He looked at Mercer. In exchange for a conversation with the lead prosecutor before any charges are formally filed. Mercer was already on her feet. Who else knows? As of 5 minutes ago, U.S. and the Georgetown field office. Marcus. Not yet. Mercer looked at Clara, then at the observer, then back at Ethan. Something passed through her face, the specific compressed expression of a person doing rapid high-stakes calculus in real time. Then she said, Ms. Bennett, how fast can you have the third document analysis complete? Clara looked at the document on her screen. She had been in it for 19 minutes. 3 hours, she said. Maybe less. You have 2, Mercer said, because at 3 p.m. I need you in a different room. She paused. Reeves has asked specifically and by name to speak with the linguistic expert who analyzed the amendment. A beat. They want to talk to you, Ms. Bennett, before they talk to anyone else. Clara looked at her for a long moment. She felt the room hold its breath around her. Ethan's gaze on the side of her face, the observer at the far end gone completely still, the assistant prosecutors not moving. She looked back at her screen, at the document, at the work still in front of her. Then I'd better get started, she said. And she turned back to the document and began. She finished the third document at 2:47 p.m. Not 2 hours, 1 hour and 49 minutes. She knew because she'd been watching the clock in the way she watched things that mattered, not anxiously, but precisely the way a surgeon monitored a timer during a procedure. Awareness without distraction. She sent the analysis to Mercer's secure folder, closed the document, rolled her shoulders once, and looked at Ethan. Done, she said. He was already standing. He'd been standing for the last 20 minutes, positioned near the door, in the particular way of a man who was ready to move. The moment moving became the right action. Mercer's in the corridor, he said. They're ready for you. The fourth document. After, he said. Reeves first. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that this was the moment the entire night had been building toward, that everything from Table 14 and the document in her secure inbox and 4 hours of work in a hotel suite and a freeze order signed at 2:58 a.m. had been moving in its own logic toward this room, this conversation, this specific afternoon. She moved toward the door. Mercer was in the corridor with the observer and one of the assistant prosecutors. When Clara came through, Mercer said without preamble, Reeves's attorney has been told you're coming. The ground rules are these: you're present as a consulting expert, not as a federal agent, not as a prosecutor. You can ask questions. You can respond to questions. You do not make representations about the prosecution's intentions or timeline. She held Clara's eyes. Reeves asked for you specifically. We don't know why. We need you to find out. I know how to read a room, Clara said. I know you do, Mercer said. And there was something in her voice, not warmth exactly, but the particular quality of one professional's recognition of another, clean and direct, and without the social softening that would have made it smaller. That's why you're going in. And the room was 2 floors up, smaller than the conference room. A table, 4 chairs, a window that let in the flat November light. Reeves was already seated when Clara came through the door. She had built a picture of Reeves in her mind over the past 14 hours, assembled from Clause 11's syntactic architecture, from Ethan's description of a person who operated in the background of the background, from the Georgetown address, and the voluntary surrender, and the specific deliberate act of asking by name for the person who had read the work. The picture she'd built was of someone controlled, strategic, a mind that operated several moves ahead and never did anything without understanding its full consequence. The person across the table matched that picture in every detail except one. Reeves was a woman. Early 60s. Dark hair gone mostly silver. The kind of face that had been precise and angular 20 years ago, and was still precise, just differently. The precision of a person who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and had learned to carry it without letting the weight show in the posture. She sat with her hands flat on the table in front of her, which was either a deliberate signal of openness or the habit of someone who had spent enough time in rooms where gesture was read for information and had learned to minimize it. Clara moved to the chair across from her, sat down, looked at her directly. Reeves looked back, and what crossed her face in that first moment, quick, involuntary, gone in under a second, was recognition. Not the recognition of having met before. The recognition of seeing something she had been looking for and finding it exactly where she'd expected it to be. "Ms. Bennett," she said. "Ms. Reeves," Clara said. "I read your analysis this morning." A pause. All three completed documents. Mercer forwarded them to my attorney. She held Clara's eyes. "You found everything?" "Yes," Clara said, "including the sequencing. The fact that the second document preceded the first, that the system was built in stages." "Yes." Reeves was quiet for a moment. Her hands stayed flat on the table. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to understand that the answer matters to me personally, not legally. My attorney has everything we need for the legal conversation. This is something else." Clara waited. "When you read Clause 11, Reeves said, when you identified the second voice, my voice in the amendment, what did you feel?" And the question landed in a way Clara hadn't anticipated. Not because it was inappropriate, because it was precise in the specific way that questions were precise when they came from someone who had spent their professional life understanding that the most important information lived not in what people reported, but in how they experienced what they found. She looked at Reeves for a long moment. She made a decision. "I felt the architecture," she said. "The way I feel it in every document that was built by someone who genuinely understood what they were building. There's a quality, a coherence to sophisticated legal construction that you can feel before you can articulate it. Clause 11 had that quality." She paused. "I also felt that whoever wrote it knew exactly what it was being used for. The misdirection was too deliberate, too technically precise to be accidental." Reeves held her gaze. "And what did you conclude from that?" "That the person who wrote it was not someone who stumbled into complicity. They chose it, knowingly, with full understanding of what the architecture would enable." Clara paused, which made me wonder why. "Mom," something shifted in Reeves's face. Not breaking, she was not a woman who broke in visible ways, but a releasing. The particular releasing of a person who has been holding something at controlled distance for a very long time and has just in one small movement let it come closer. "I built that system," Reeves said, "because 20 years ago, I was one of the most respected legal architects in international humanitarian framework design. I believed what I was building mattered. I believed the frameworks I designed protected people." A pause. "I was contacted 8 years ago by a man named Cross. He told me he was building a disbursement structure for a network of humanitarian programs. He needed someone who understood framework language at the level I understood it. He paid very well." She paused. "I didn't know at first what the structure was actually for." Clara watched her. "When did you know?" 18 months in, Reeves said. "I found an inconsistency in the transaction reporting. I went back through the documents I'd built, and I understood what I had made." She paused. "I had built the cage. I just hadn't known who was going to be locked inside it." "The programs," Clara said. "The programs, the people at the end of them." Her hands on the table moved, not much, just the smallest, tightening the knuckles, whitening briefly, before she controlled it back to stillness. "I thought about walking away. I told myself the structure existed regardless of whether I stayed, that removing myself wouldn't dismantle what I'd already built, that it was too late." A pause. "I told myself that for 6 years." "What changed?" Clara said. Reeves looked at her directly. "You did." The room went very still. "Not you specifically," Reeves said. "Not yet, but someone like you. I started following your work, the published analyses, the expert testimonies in international framework, disputes about 3 years ago. I was looking, I think, for evidence that the kind of expertise I'd used to build this system could also be used to dismantle it. She paused. When the federal investigation opened 14 months ago, and I understood where it was headed, I knew the amendment was the piece they couldn't crack. I knew what kind of expertise would crack it. She held Clara's eyes. I knew your secure inbox address because I'd been preparing for this moment for 11 months. Day. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, completely full, the specific fullness of a moment in which the entire structure of something enormous had just become visible all at once, the way a building's architecture became visible only when you stepped far enough back to see the whole of it. Then Clara held the information, let it arrive at its actual size. The invitation sitting on her kitchen table for 6 weeks. The document appearing in her inbox Friday night. The 4 words, please read this tonight, that were not a stranger's desperate gamble, but a calculated, prepared 11-month act of deliberate intention from the person who had built the system and spent 6 years finding the will to help destroy it. You sent it, Clara said. Yes. The reunion. You knew Marcus would be there. Marcus has been attending that reunion every 5 years since graduation. It was in his calendar. I've had access to his calendar for 7 years. A pause. I knew Ethan Brooks was investigating. I'd been watching the federal investigation's edges for 14 months. When I confirmed that Ethan would be at the reunion, that Marcus and Ethan would be in the same room. I understood that was the moment, the pressure point where the thing underneath would surface. She looked at Clara. I needed someone who could read pressure points, who could walk into a room that didn't expect her and see what everyone else was too comfortable to see. Clara was quiet for a long moment. You put me in danger, she said. Not accusation. Statement. The clean, direct delivery of a fact that needed to be named. Yes, Reeves said. I did. And I'm not going to ask you to forgive that. I'm going to ask you to understand that the 47 programs and the people at the end of them were the calculation I made. Not lightly, but I made it. I know, Clara said. I made the same calculation when I put my name on the document. Reeves looked at her. Something moved through her face. The bone-level thing, the thing below management and strategy, and the practiced stillness of a person who had survived in difficult rooms for a long time by controlling what their face showed. It moved through, and she let it briefly, without pulling it back. Yes, she said quietly. You did. Clara held her gaze. What's in the proffer? Clara held her. Everything, Reeves said. Full documentation of the system's construction. Every document, every operator, every client who purchased access to the architecture across 7 years and 4 jurisdictions. Names, transaction records, the complete sequence. She paused. Marcus Hale is one of 9 clients. The proffer covers all 9. Clara absorbed that. 9. Not 4 documents. 9 operations. The scale of it arrived in stages the way large things always arrived. First, the number, then the programs behind the number, then the people behind the programs, then the specific human weight of what $60 million meant when it was the difference between a medical supply chain that functioned and one that didn't. Why tell me this? Clara said. Because you're going to testify, Reeves said. And when you do, you'll be asked about the amendment's architecture. You'll be asked about the sophistication of the construction, about what it revealed about the person who built it. She paused. I wanted you to know before you testify that the person who built it knew what she was doing and knew what it cost and spent 6 years building toward the moment she could help undo it. Another pause. Not for sympathy, for accuracy. You read documents for what's underneath the words. I wanted you to know what's underneath these. Clara looked at her for a long time. I'll tell the truth, she said. That's all I can promise you. That's all I'm asking, Reeves said. Clara moved toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped, turned back. "The sequencing," she said. "Building the second document, first establishing the foundational architecture before the operational document. That was deliberate. You built it so that anyone who read deeply enough would eventually find the sequence and understand that the system was constructed, not improvised." She held Reeves's eyes. "You built in the evidence of intent." Reeves held her gaze. "I'm a very precise architect," she said. "I always have been." Clara looked at her for one more moment. Then she went through the door. Ethan was in the corridor. He read her face the way he'd been reading it since the night before, not for what she was performing, but for what she was actually carrying. "What happened?" he said. "She sent the document," Clara said. "Reeves, 11 months of preparation. She built the system and then spent 6 years building the means to expose it." She looked at him steadily. "She knew my name. She knew the reunion. She put the document in my path on purpose." Ethan stared at her. 3 full seconds, which from a man who processed things as quickly and quietly as he did, was the equivalent of a longer reaction from almost anyone else. "She's cooperating because she planned to cooperate," he said. "This wasn't fear of the investigation. She was steering toward this." "Yes." He looked away for a moment, then back. "How do you feel about that?" She thought about it honestly. About being a piece in someone else's calculation moved deliberately into a position without her knowledge or consent. About the 11 months of preparation that had pointed toward her, specifically her name, her inbox, her skill set, her stubborn, unreasonable willingness to show up to a reunion she'd almost skipped. "I feel," she said carefully, "that she was right about what I could do with that document. And that the 47 programs are still running. And that 9 operations are about to be exposed instead of 4. She paused. "The rest of it, the feeling about being chosen without being asked, I'll work out later. On the train." Ethan looked at her. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Okay." The same way he said things that mattered without inflation, without the social padding that would have made it easier to receive and less true. They went back to the conference room. At 4:15 p.m., Mercer walked in with the observer behind her and stood at the head of the table with the expression of someone who was about to deliver information that reorganized everything. "Marcus Hale's attorney contacted us 40 minutes ago," she said. "Marcus is requesting a meeting, not a surrender meeting. He wants to talk before we file." She paused. "He's been informed through his financial team that the Meridian accounts are frozen on the basis of a linguistic analysis of the amendment framework. He knows the document he was counting on has been dismantled." She looked at Clara. "He asked who produced the analysis." The room was quiet. "What did you tell him?" Ethan said. "We told him the expert's name." Mercer held Clara's eyes. "He went quiet for about 15 seconds. Then he said he wanted the meeting." A pause. "I don't know what that silence means, but I know what usually precedes a request for a meeting in my experience." "He's calculating whether he has anything left to negotiate with," Clara said. "Yes," Mercer said, "which means he's already decided the fight is over. He just hasn't accepted it yet." She paused. "I'm not granting the meeting. We file in 31 hours regardless. But I wanted you to know." She looked at Clara directly. "He knows your name now. He knows what you did. I want you to have that information." Clara thought about the ballroom, about Marcus's hand on the back of her wheelchair, about the way he'd looked at her through her past, her at the category he'd assigned before she'd said a word, about the microphone and the laugh, and someone tell me who invited her, and the 200 people who had turned to look at a woman alone at the back table, catching chandelier light she'd never asked for. She thought about what it felt like to be the thing in the room that nobody had planned for. "Good," she said. Mercer looked at her for a moment. Then, with the small, precise nod of a person who understood exactly what that word meant in this context, "Good." At 5:30 p.m., Clara finished the 4th document. She sat back, read through her analysis one final time, with the discipline she brought to every final review, looking for the crack in the argument, the place where the language hadn't quite held the weight she'd asked it to carry. There were none. The work was clean. She sent it. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Outside Washington was doing its November work, the cold, purposeful air of a city built entirely around the business of consequence. She could feel it through the window without looking. She'd felt it since the car arrived that morning. Ethan came and sat in the chair across from her. He didn't speak immediately. He was good at not speaking when silence was the right thing. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is. The deposition prep. Mercer said tomorrow morning. She pushed it. She said you'd done enough today." He paused. "She's right." Clara looked at him. At this white man in his early 40s who had sat down at the wrong table on a Friday night and decided to stay, and who had spent the last 18 hours being exactly what he appeared to be, which in her experience was rarer than any other quality a person could have. "How's Lily?" she said. Something happened to his face, the full release of it, the warmth, the particular braided quality of love and weariness, and profound, undefended pride that surfaced every time his daughter's name came into the conversation. He reached into his jacket pocket and held up his phone. A text from an unsaved number that was clearly saved in every way that mattered. "Dad, did you save the people waffles or pancakes for celebration breakfast?" Clara looked at the message, then at Ethan. "What did you tell her?" "I haven't answered yet," he said. He held the phone for a moment, then typed, "Yes. We saved the people. Pancakes. 3 dots. Then good. Bring your friend." He looked at Clara. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment, because the moment didn't need words. It was already full of the weight of everything the night before had been, and everything the day had required, and the small, plain, completely serious invitation from a 9-year-old girl who made pancakes for the people she loved, and had decided in the direct and uncomplicated way of children, who had already learned that life was short and people were worth choosing. That Clara was one of those people. "Tell her I'd like that," Clara said. He typed it. Then he set the phone on the table and looked at her with the steady, direct quality she'd come to understand was simply how he looked at things that mattered to him, without filter, without management, with the plain weight of full attention. "Clara," he said, "I need to say something." "All right. What you did in that hotel suite last night, and what you did in this building today, I've been in this work for 15 years in various forms. I've worked with federal prosecutors and financial analysts and forensic accountants and people who are very, very good at what they do." He paused. "I have never seen anyone do what you did with that document. Never seen anyone hold the full architecture of a complex fraud system in their mind and dismantle it with the precision you used, in the time you used, under the conditions you were working under." He held her eyes. "You are one of the most capable people I have ever been in a room with. And I want to say it plainly without the around-it language that people usually use, not for someone in your situation, not given everything you've been through. Just you. What you are. What you do. It's extraordinary." She held the words. Let them arrive at their actual size. Not deflect them, not minimize them, not process them through the filter of everything she'd learned to do with compliments that were actually expressions of surprise. She let them land as what they were, a plain, direct, unqualified statement from a man who chose his words the way she chose hers, and therefore meant every one of them exactly as he said them. "I know what I'm capable of," she said quietly. "I know you do," he said. "I'm saying it because the world hasn't said it often enough, and I'm aware that's not my problem to fix, but I can say it, so I'm saying it." She was quiet for a moment. The room held the particular quality of late afternoon, the light shifting the building's ambient sound, settling into the lower register of the day winding toward its end. She thought about the ceiling tiles in the rehabilitation ward, about looking up at them and thinking, okay, so what comes next? About 20 years of building something out of that question, the degrees, the work, the expertise, the rhythm of a life constructed with precision and purpose out of what remained after the accident took what it took. She thought about the invitation on her kitchen table, about the stubborn, unreasonable part of herself that had known before any of the reasonable parts had caught up that there was something on the other side of this night that was hers. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. You're a good man." He looked at her. The unguarded thing moved through his face, the bone-level thing that she'd seen briefly in the hotel suite, when he'd talked about Lily, and hadn't seen since the thing below the management and the steadiness and the disciplined control of a person who had learned to carry significant weight without letting it alter his bearing. It moved through, and he let it. "I'm trying to be," he said, "for Lily." "Not only for Lily," she said. He held her gaze for a long, steady moment. The kind of moment that didn't need to be filled or explained or rushed through. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something shifted in his expression, quick, sharp. "Marcus," he said. His attorney just issued the board statement. Clara went still. "He moved anyway," Ethan said. "Even knowing the accounts are frozen. Even knowing we're filing in 30 hours. He looked up. He issued the statement. "Read it," she said. Ethan read aloud. The Foundation's disbursement practices were fully compliant with all applicable regulatory frameworks. The current freeze on Foundation accounts was a procedural matter arising from a third-party translation error in the amendment certification language. The Foundation expected full resolution within 72 hours and remained committed to its humanitarian mission. Silence. Then Clara said, "A translation error." "Yes," Ethan said. His voice was very quiet. She sat with that for exactly the time it needed. The deliberateness of it. The specific choice to name her work, not her, not explicitly, but the work, the thing she had spent 4 hours doing in a hotel suite in the middle of the night, as the error, as the problem, as the thing to be explained away. "He doesn't know," she said, that Reeves turned herself in. "No?" Ethan said. "He doesn't know the proffer covers 9 operations. He doesn't know the 4th document analysis went in at 5:30. He doesn't know the federal filing covers everything he built, not just Meridian." He paused. "He issued that statement because he thought he still had room." "He doesn't," Clara said. "No," Ethan said. "He doesn't." She looked at her laptop, at the 4 analyses transmitted attributed citable, at the work that had begun with Clause 7's false reference, and ended with a complete map of a 7-year system built to move money away from hundreds of thousands of people who needed it. She thought about translation error. She thought about 20 years of being assigned to the wrong category in rooms that hadn't planned for her. She thought about Table 14 and the seating card and the chandelier light and a microphone grabbed out of a host's hand. She thought he still doesn't understand what he was looking at. "Mercer needs to know immediately," she said. "I'm already texting her," Ethan said. "The statement becomes evidence," Clara said. "He's publicly attributed the freeze to a flaw in the amendment language, a language he certified as compliant. That's a direct contradiction of the compliance certification he signed in the original framework agreement." She was already opening her laptop. "I need to add a supplementary note to the 4th analysis documenting the specific language of the certification he signed, and how his public statement today constitutes an implicit acknowledgement that the amendment language functioned differently than the certification claimed." She was already typing. Ethan watched her for a moment, then quietly, with the specific quality of warmth that lived in him below everything else. He called it a translation error. "I know," she said without looking up. "He has no idea," Ethan said. "No," she said. "He doesn't." She kept typing. He never did. At 6:48 p.m., Mercer called. She had seen the statement. She had seen Clara's supplementary note, which had arrived in her folder 11 minutes after the statement was issued. Her exact words were, "Ms. Bennett, I want you to know that the note you just sent has added a charge to the filing that we didn't have this morning. Public misrepresentation in a certified regulatory context. A pause. He handed it to us. Yes, Clara said. He did. Because he didn't understand what he was dealing with, Mercer said. And there was something in her voice, not satisfaction. Exactly the thing that was more durable than satisfaction. The thing that persisted after the moment had passed. Because he looked at the wheelchair and the back table and made a decision about what he was looking at. A pause. He made the wrong decision. Most people do, Clara said. The first time. He won't get a second time, Mercer said, and ended the call. Ethan took her to the train station. They walked, she moved, and he walked beside her, matching her pace without thinking about it. The way people matched pace with people they'd been through something with, and whose rhythm had become part of the landscape they were navigating together. The November air was cold and direct, and doing nothing to soften the edge of things which she had always preferred. She liked weather that was honest about itself. At the entrance to the station he stopped. "Train safe," he said. She looked at him. "That's not a thing people say." "It should be," he said. A small smile crossed her face. She held it. She turned toward the entrance, then stopped. "Ethan," she said. She turned back to look at him. "The pancakes. Tell Lily I'll bring the blueberries." He looked at her for a moment. The warmth in his face unguarded, unmanaged the real thing underneath everything else. "She's going to hold you to that," he said. "Good," Clara said. "She should." She went through the entrance, found the platform, settled into her seat, opened her laptop because the discipline of returning to work after significant things was one of the ways she maintained her own continuity. But she didn't open a document. She opened her notebook, the one she always carried, uncapped the pen, looked at the blank page for a moment, then she wrote. Not for a document or a deposition or a professional record, just words on a page for herself, the habit of a person who thought in language and needed to write things down to understand them fully. She wrote about the reunion, about Table 14, about the current that changed when she entered the room, about Marcus Hale's hand on the back of her wheelchair and what it felt like to absorb that without giving him what he was looking for. She wrote about Ethan sitting down at the wrong table and staying, about 4 hours of work in a hotel suite, and what it felt like to finish something that mattered. About the specific quality of being fully believed, not managed, not accommodated, not quietly marveled at. Believed. About 47 programs continuing in the uninterrupted ordinary way that meant they were working, which was the only measure that actually counted. She wrote about Reeves and the 11 months of preparation, and the document routed to her secure inbox by a person who had built a system and spent 6 years building the courage to help destroy it. She wrote about the word Mercer had used, extraordinary, and the word Ethan had used, the plain, unqualified, unfiltered version of it, and what it felt like to let words like that arrive at their actual size, instead of at the deflated version she'd been accepting for 20 years. She wrote until the words ran out, and what was left was the thing underneath them. The thing that didn't need language. The thing she had been tending quietly, and without audience for 20 years, with the patience of someone who understood that the most important things took the longest to grow. Her phone lit up. Ethan. A photo, no message. Lily's blueberry pancakes photographed from above with a child's complete sincerity and no concept of composition. Butter pooling at the edges, entirely imperfect, completely wonderful. She looked at the photo for a long moment. She thought about the first night in the rehabilitation ward, about ceiling tiles and okay, what comes next? About the 20 years that had followed that question, the degrees, the work, the expertise, the rhythm of a life built with precision and purpose out of what remained. She thought about the invitation sitting on her kitchen table for 6 weeks, about the stubborn, unreasonable part of her that had known before. The reasonable parts caught up that there was something on the other side of this night that was hers. She typed back, "Tell her the composition needs work, The instincts are perfect. 3 dots. She says she'll take it. She also says bring the blueberries Sunday and she'll show you in person. And Clara looked at that message. At the plain, simple, completely serious offer from a 9-year-old girl who had told her father to stop using her as a reason not to do things, who had named herself from a book and taken the name for her own, who made pancakes when the people she loved needed something real. She typed back, "Tell her I'll be there." She set the phone down. The train moved. Outside, the city became suburbs, became the open dark of distance and speed. She looked at her notebook, at the words still settling on the page. She had never been invisible. She understood that now in a way that was different from knowing deeper, cleaner, settled all the way to the floor. They had simply never known how to see her. Marcus Hale had looked at a wheelchair and a back table and made a decision about what he was dealing with. He had been wrong every single time in every single room for 20 years running, and on the night it finally cost him everything. He still hadn't understood what was sitting across from him. She had walked into that ballroom in deep navy, taken her seat at table 14, opened her notebook, and waited. Not for permission, not for acknowledgement, not for a room that would finally decide she belonged in it. She had waited for the moment that was already hers. And when it came, she was ready. She had always been ready. That was the thing they never saw coming. Not the wheelchair, not the back table, not the woman who arrived quietly and sat where they put her and smiled pleasantly and moved on. The thing they never saw coming was 20 years of accumulated, undeflectable, unstoppable expertise carried into a room full of people who had already decided what she was by a woman who had long ago stopped needing them to be right. Marcus Hale had grabbed a microphone and pointed across a ballroom and laughed. Clara Bennett had sent a document at 2 a.m. that locked his accounts, exposed 9 operations across 2 continents, produced a charge he handed to the prosecutors himself, and changed the shape of what came next for hundreds of thousands of people he had never once considered when he was building the system that stole from them. She closed her notebook. Outside the window, the dark was full of moving things, lights in the distance, the sensation of being in transit between who you were before something happened and who you became after it. She had never been afraid of that sensation. She set the pen down, looked at the dark moving past the glass, and for the first time in longer than she could cleanly remember, she was something she had no efficient professional word for. She was found. Not by the ballroom that had put her at table 14. Not by the reunion that had assessed her at the door and assigned her a category that had nothing to do with what she was actually carrying. Not by the long succession of rooms and institutions and architectures that had been designed, consciously or not, to make her feel that visibility was a gift others could choose to grant or withhold. Found by her own work, by the precise and undeflectable capability she had built over 20 years and carried into a room that didn't see it coming. Found by the unexpected grace of being understood by someone who had the intelligence to recognize her, the character to stand beside her, and the decency to say so plainly. Found by a 9-year-old girl who made pancakes and asked no questions about wheelchairs and said, "Bring the blueberries Sunday," as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Because for Lily, it was. Found most of all by herself. By the stubborn, unreasonable part of her that had looked at an invitation for 6 weeks and known that there was something on the other side of that door that was hers. The train moved through the dark. She had been ready. She had always been ready.